It is not good evening. It is good morning here at Hog Talk Studios as we welcome in Matt Brown for a special episode of the Hog Talk podcast. We're coming to you not live. This is a pre-recorded episode. Matt with Extra Points is coming in to talk about the controversial subject of Arkansas discontinuing the tennis program, which ironic, Arkansas is going to be playing here in a few short hours in the national tournament. So, Matt, I really want to thank you for coming on this morning. We regularly go Sundays and Thursday evenings, so I really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So your article, I come on upon your article, and I'm sure, I mean, you've been getting blasted this week because there's something special about Arkansas Twitter. There's something special about the Arkansas fan base.
Sure.
And when Arkansas athletic director is already not in good graces with the public eye and the fans, when we see them cut the men's and women's tennis programs with no notice, we seen an article from Best of Arkansas Sports that, they didn't hardly get a chance to change their mind, do anything. They just cut both programs. Then we see your article really explaining the nuts and bolts of what went into this. So, it comes down to Arkansas is down to 17 sports now, which is one above the 16 required to be an FBS school. The U of A said there's no plans for other cuts, but which sport do you think could be on the chopping block next and we're seeing other schools now tennis. So you're seeing the dominoes fall. So how many other sports could you see that could be affected from this?
Honestly, when Arkansas says in the initial press release that we're not planning on cutting any other sports right now, I would take them at their word. And a big part of that is because, like you said, you're already very close to the cutoff line. There's requirements to remain in good graces with the SEC to sponsor a particular number of sports. And when you begin to move beyond tennis into things that have larger roster sizes, you run into not only does this actually save us money, but does this put us into conflict with Title IX? Does this put us into conflict with other federal regulations that could inspire lawsuits and then mitigate some of those savings, right? The only thing I could possibly think of that might fit the profile of a sport where a school might want to get out would be women's swimming and diving, but you already have the facility. And in order to convert that into just renting it out to high schoolers or anybody else generally doesn't line up with what a school is trying to do. The one caveat I would say is it is entirely possible that a school, Arkansas or anybody else, could theoretically look to add sports that are much cheaper and then swap out and try to save money elsewhere, right? This is something that sometimes schools do with beach volleyball. Sometimes they do it with stunt. Throughout the Southeast, and I imagine across the country, the next couple of years, you're going to see more and more programs add women's flag football, which is extraordinarily cheap. And then if that becomes a scholarship sport, maybe they look at something else. But those are all down the line. I don't think there's any reason to suggest anything else at Arkansas is at immediate risk.
So from your point of view, when you've seen the news of this, and now, a week later, we're seeing other programs. Did this come to a shock to you that we're seeing this in Division II, Division III schools? Was it a shock to you that a major Power 4 school had cut their whole tennis program? You mentioned swimming and diving; they cut that and then brought it back. So they've X'd that before. So was it a shock to you to see this happen? But yet, kind of be an eye opener. This is where we are with NIL and the transfer portal era.
I can't say I'm extraordinarily shocked because college tennis in particular, I think, is uniquely disadvantaged right now. Big schools, medium schools, small schools. There's a lot of reasons why a program might want to look at sponsoring something else. I believe just yesterday, North Dakota eliminated their program. Different financial reasons than I think what Arkansas is looking at. And we could talk about some of the stuff with tennis specifically in a minute. So seeing that didn't immediately shock me. I think I would gently push back at anybody that says, oh my God, Arkansas had to do this, or anybody else had to do this because of NIL, because of the transfer portal. I don't think that that's completely true. And while it is fair to say costs are going up everywhere, and at a place like Arkansas, some of that is because of revenue sharing, but also things are getting more expensive just in general. And that's not the only cost curve that's going up, not just at Arkansas, but elsewhere. Raw materials, fuel, travel costs, insurance, all of those things are going up. And across the country, again, I can't speak specifically to U of A, but across the country, even at high enrollment, state flagship land grant research institutions, state funding is often in decline. And I believe even in Arkansas, like the governing body here has said, like you're not going to get unlimited resources from the rest of the university or the rest of the state. So I think it's important to look at this in the context of, hey, a lot of schools are still facing the same financial pressures that they had during COVID, and digging themselves out of that. I don't think it's fair to blame what happened here, what may happen in the immediate future, as just on, oh my God, we got to pay the offensive line cash. Therefore, to get rid of this. I look at that as an excuse. This is, our values are shifting, and that may be defensible. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong decision. It's just Arkansas is choosing to spend that money on other things.
And, you bring up a great point with travel. You're seeing a lot of conference realignments. You're seeing a lot of super conferences. You're seeing UCLA, Stanford being in conferences on the East Coast. And so we're talking about schools that are having to cut programs, but yet we have Division I football teams flying across the country. Probably you're talking about the revenue that you get from a tennis program. You're spending that on 2 flights, for a year of. So from Arkansas' standpoint, the fans, it just come as a shell shock. We knew. And then, of course, we're hyper-focused here. We see NIL. We see the gymnastics coach leaving for other reasons, but you want to couple everything together and you just start going crazy about it. But then I sent you a screenshot. The following day, the state government here in Arkansas passed a $1.3 billion bill, and it's going to the athletic salaries and operational costs. And I don't know if you're familiar with that article or that story, but it really comes at a time of, could that have saved the program? Was it redundant to X the tennis program when you have all this funding coming? And I think that's what made a lot of people furious is, one, you didn't get any chance to save the program. You didn't get any notice. And now the very next day you're receiving $1.3 billion from the state government.
Yeah, I think that the intellectually honest way to frame all of this is, and this is going to sound like an attack, but I don't mean it to be. The way to frame it is the school did not want to fund this program anymore. There's almost always another way, right? Yeah. If Arkansas State can afford to have tennis, if half the HBCUs in this country can afford to have tennis, or Summit League schools or Horizon League schools, the sheer act of having a team is not outside of the financial grasp of any SEC program. And it's true. If you publicly fundraise for this, if you leak that we might be cutting it unless we can raise X, Y, or Z, or endow X, Y, or Z, there's often a way for donors who were not engaged to come up. But if as a department you're thinking, look, man, we have these 20 men and women on campus for tennis, and we know that it's going to cost $2.5 to $3-ish million operationally. If we remove them, now we have we don't have to have as many academic support counselors. We don't have to have as many trainers. We don't have to have as many bus drivers. And the people that we do have can now have a more one-to-one relationship with our athletes. And maybe we reinvest some of that money into golf, or we reinvest it into softball, places where an extra 300 or 400 grand in operational spending could maybe have a meaningful impact. I think that's defensible.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't think I want to jump up here and say whether that's right or wrong, because fellas, I don't live in Arkansas, right? Exactly. I don't have an emotional tie to this program. I think if the school said, hey, listen, our tennis program, it's mostly international kids. We've only got one Arkansan on the roster. We only got one other North American. And maybe we want to shift our sports sponsorship to a portfolio that's more relevant to our fans locally, or more relevant to our alumni in Texas and Oklahoma and Missouri and elsewhere. So you want to shift things. That's completely fine too. Like, I think that's defensible. When Clemson changed their sport portfolio, that was part of their argument, and people got a little huffy, but then, they got over it and it made sense. So, all of that, fine. I would gently push back if I hear someone say that has $184 million on their athletic budget, that this 2.5 million was a bridge too far. It's a question of what you want to spend the money on, not do you have the money.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned that Arkansas had close to zero revenue from the tennis, while other schools' money came primarily from athletic fees. Now we're seeing, and this was another thing I believe I read in your article or another piece, that we're saying that it's only raised $3,200 of revenue. Then it comes out, well, if you count the kids that are paying full tuition, so to me, is that, were we being betrayed that, or deceived that Arkansas is only bringing in this much revenue when the cost, operational cost, is 2.5 million? When I don't know how many students on this roster paid for their schooling. So I think you mentioned if it was even four, that's $250,000. So what is the pushback on that? Well, how do they defend that if they're saying, well, we're not bringing any revenue, but yet 8 of our kids are not on scholarship, they're paying full tuition?
It's a good question. I want to couch how I respond here with saying that I can talk about these trends generally and nationally, but there's going to be some school specific context that off the dome I might not be able to give, right? But one of the things that's challenging about tennis in college is that most of the traditional ways that you generate revenue from an athletic team are not really available. Very few teams in this country have enough seating to ticket for tennis matches. My understanding is Arkansas is not one of those programs. I've been to tennis matches and I've written about tennis matches elsewhere in the country from teams that compete for conference championships, and it's no ticketing, right? So that means you're not making money from parking. There might not be any concessions. You're not making money from any of those traditional things. Whereas at a basketball game, you could charge $40 a spot, $11 for a beer, the whole thing. So you can't do that for tennis. And you're not going to get any itemized television rights because the ESPN and the SEC aren't putting this at 3:00 on a Saturday on national television. So you don't have those. So then you are limited. One thing that many other programs in this country do, that based on the data available to me, Arkansas has not done, is run sport camps to generate other revenue, or to rent out their facilities to generate other revenue. And sometimes schools do this and they don't keep any of the money. They use it to pay for assistant coach salaries, or to subsidize a spending elsewhere. So it doesn't show up on this spreadsheet. But those are other ways you can make money directly from tennis. Arkansas doesn't appear to have been doing those. Not doing very little from sponsorships and corporate engagement within tennis. Now, the part about tuition, like that is true. Most collegiate tennis players in the United States and in the NCAA, whether they come from the United States or elsewhere, are not Pell Grant kids. They're not people that are going to qualify for a lot of federal government subsidies to attend school. They tend to be more affluent. There's a reason we call country club sports. Is you typically play them at country clubs, and that means you have a country club membership. And a lot of the people that are playing tennis in the United States that are from Croatia or from Australia or Japan or elsewhere in the world, these are generally not poor kids either. They might get some kind of grant outside the athletic department, but they're typically high income individuals, and sometimes they're on full scholarship and sometimes they're not. And if they're not, they got to pay the full freight for room and board and full sticker price. And this, I think, is important because sometimes you hear politicians or radio hosts or other folks saying like, oh my God, it's terrible. We have all these international kids at Arkansas or at Little Rock or somewhere else. They're taking spots away from kids in Arkansas. And I would say that's generally not the case. And in fact, if some kid from Brazil is paying $55,000 a year to go to the Fayetteville campus, that is giving the school the money and the leeway to give a kid from suburban Little Rock an opportunity to go for $7,000, right? Like you generally, it's generally a trade-off that people want. Without knowing the exact number of full ride scholarships that were offered, we have an idea about what UA spent on scholarships, but without knowing that, it's hard to calculate how much tuition revenue. The trend that you and I were both describing there, that's a major reason why so many small schools have tennis and golf programs. They look at the revenue from tuition, but that tuition doesn't show up on this NCAA report that I'm quoting from, right? A lot of other reporters file FOILs that get the same report. Some SEC schools just publish it, like LSU and Georgia. And for that, thank you. You will see the gates of heaven. And that's why you look at this. And I think people treat this MFRS report like a credit card statement or a P&L and think, well, oh my God, if you're losing $250,000, of course you get rid of it. And I say this as the guy that looks through these reports professionally. There's a lot of context that's missing. It's usually not that simple.
When you look at that itemized, it's like look at your receipt and then you see it itemized. Hey, they're really bringing in. And That's the thing that really confuses me as outsider looking in, being a fan of all the sports and stuff. I don't the reason why would you think to be the reasoning why, other than they just flat out don't want to fund it? That and this is not Arkansas specific.
Yeah.
Why would athletic programs or ADs hide that information if it's bringing in rev? I just don't understand the fact of why they're putting a black eye on something that could be used as, hey, we have all these international kids coming in, and the diversity to Arkansas is a small state, but the diversity of UA, and not to mention, we're talking about kids in Texas. There's such a big influx from Texas to Arkansas. They don't pay out of state tuition. So there's a lot of caveats where, you get breaks here, but we're going to take it away from other places. But why do you think people just decide not to put that in their reports?
Well, so the report that I FOIL across the country, the one that I put into our Extra Points library and talk about financial accounting here in college sports, it's part of it of a specialized form that the NCAA asks everybody in D1 and D2 to fill out, this membership financial report system, MFRS. And you're supposed to do this in the same standardized way as everybody else does in the NCAA. They don't, but it's the closest thing we have to that. And that doesn't include easy ways to talk about international athlete tuition revenue. It doesn't allow ways, I think, to quantify some of the other potential benefits from an athletic department, whether that's state appropriations or, hey, we're funding this because the guy in the Arkansas State House who helps carve out research money, he's a huge baseball guy. And maybe we get that guy box seats and he comes and he roots for the Hogs, and then he signs the bill that helps us get X, Y, or Z, which is a thing that really happens all across the country. That doesn't show up in there. The way to the form allows the simplest discussion and transmission studying of finances is to limit it to athletics as much as possible, because how the U of A university system handles a lot of expense reporting is going to be different from how Texas does it, or from how Alaska does it, or from how Baylor does it. So I look at this and I tell folks all the time in our publication, this is useful data. We should talk about it. We should share as much context as we can. They're not perfect apples to apples comparisons, and we shouldn't use this like it came from Mount Sinai on a stone tablet, direct from the Lord, right? This is a starting point. We should ask other follow-up questions about it. The Yurchek's not the guy that writes this report either, right? Like this is coming from a third-party auditing firm. It's coming from the general counsel's office. Like I don't think he has the ability to go in here and go, hey, let's put a PR statement around this particular line item because it's going to make us look good or look bad. That usually isn't how it works.
And coming from, switching to the AD and knowing that their importance and their job. I mean, there's a lot of negativity towards Arkansas and the athletic director, Hunter Yurchek. And, before we started recording, I was talking about, being a sales rep in territory with no competition. And, you don't even have a name for your football stadium. That's been expired 2 years now. So, of course, when you see stuff like this, you point fingers at the athletic director, because this again could have been, U of A could have avoided dissolving the program by doing other things. And I think if he would have done a better job at fundraising for football, or he's not for NIL. So being for NIL, embracing that, other things we talked about, the raffle. There's been so many things that I feel, and a lot of us Razorback fans and media content creators feel like he's dropped the ball, and this is just a scapegoat of saving just a few $1,000,000, when if you have a name for the stadium, if you have a raffle that's working and not just giving out $1,000 a week, so is there other schools? I mean, when you're talking about the spending that they did for tennis, is that the case for a lot of the non-revenue schools, women's sports, or is it just an exception?
I don't think it's necessarily an exception. I mean, let me try to give a little bit, maybe some context around the money here, right? So if we're looking at these reports, we can see that Arkansas reports that they spent about $185 million or so across their entire athletic department. And we can look at where these revenues come in. They're reporting about 190, and that's for total revenue here. That's near the bottom-ish of the SEC. And like I think you and I and most Arkansas fans would agree, it's probably not reasonable to expect Arkansas to have a budget like Texas. Texas is a wealthier state, it's a wealthier school, has wealthier alumni, and has different connections to corporate America. Like that's not necessarily what you're comparing yourself to. The number that jumps out to me is the amount of revenue that the university athletic department reports that came in through donor contributions. And in fiscal year 25 at Arkansas, that's about $37 million. That's a big number, right? $37 million from fans and from donors set up endowments and regular people cut checks. That's a lot of money, but that's also very close to the bottom of the entire SEC. That's a smaller number than everybody except for Kentucky and South Carolina. And when I shared this with other Arkansas fans, and this has come up with some other SEC conversations too, I think part of the reason for this, and I say this again, not pejoratively, I think this is just the reality. Arkansas is not a wealthy state. There are plenty of wealthy people that live here. There are a few massive corporations, but this is not a state, and for that matter, not a university alumni base that has millions of people making $350,000 working for Deloitte. And I think it is reasonable to say, hey, could the university do a better job of cultivating relationships with major corporations that are not Walmart, that are not Dillard's, and that are not Tyson's? Yes. Are there as many of those corporations to choose from as Georgia or Georgia Tech or Tennessee or Oklahoma have available to them? Probably not. So then the things kind of kick down to the donors. And there's a lot of numbers to indicate that Arkansas has great fan support. Arkansas baseball generates more money in ticket revenue and has more butts going through the turnstiles and in seats than not only almost anybody else in the country, but almost any other non-football or basketball sport in the country. It's right up there with North Dakota hockey and Penn State wrestling as some of the very highest areas. As a university, the school does a great job of selling tickets. But I think there is a challenge. And either how do I cultivate a donor base that is more diverse than just 12 mega boosters and a lot of people who are willing to pay $40 to come see the team. And that's something that I think the university hasn't done as strong of a job of compared to, quite frankly, Mississippi State or Missouri or Ole Miss, programs that I don't think necessarily have way more money or are demographically way more advantaged than Arkansas is. I've had a lot of fans reach out to me and say, what the hell's the deal with the stadium naming rights? Like, why is this taking so long? And without knowing some of the very specifics to this market, I can tell you that process takes a lot longer at a lot of places than you'd think. Mm-hmm. There's still, I think, half the schools in FBS that don't have a field level sponsorship right now, even though that's been permitted. And part of that is because there's not that many entities that have the money to enter into that long term of a relationship. And it's not worth doing if you can't get that number. Because if Arkansas, let's say if Arkansas theoretically said, we just need to get something on this stadium, we're going to do a deal with a regional bank, in Fayetteville rather than a really big corporation. And we're going to do it and we're going to make $2 million a year for 10 years, making up numbers here. Well, that's going to make it much harder for them to get a much bigger number after that deal's over. Especially because the longer you have the name of something, the harder it is for fans to imagine the name being something else. Like as an example, where do you think the Pittsburgh Steelers play?
Heinz Field.
It's Heinz Field, right? It's not Heinz Field in real life, but because we spent so much time thinking it that way. I grew up in Ohio. I still think that the Guardians play at Jacobs Field. I think that was three names ago. And then this is a legitimate documented thing. So if you're trying to sell the naming rights here to Arkansas Medical or some financial services company or something, or some boring company, they're looking at this as a 40-year commitment rather than an 8 or a 10-year commitment. You can see there's just not as many of those, especially because Tyson's and Walmart are already very integrated with the university. And they might think, why am I giving you another 10, 12, $15 million when I've already got the chicken man on all the gymnastics uniforms and I'm already, leveraged all the way up here, right? So it's a long way of saying, I understand the frustration and I understand the reality here that your ability to be good at everything, which you'd like to be, is hamstrung a little bit by resources. I would say that some of those challenges are beyond just Hunter, right? And there are things that hopefully the governor can help with. Hopefully the rest of the business community can help with, or ways that people that don't have a ton of money but might be able to contribute in other ways might be able to help with.
And I think a lot of the frustration is 90% of it is just the things that Hunter Yurachek says and either walks back on or does, because you brought up a good point. And this is where I battle with some of the people. I mean, we have a super fan base here that I had told one guy last week, are you playing the fiddle in the band that Tanic's on? Like you're just going to go down with the ship thinking he's doing such a great job. But he said that Walmart and Tyson is not going to save your football program. Then the very next week, he puts Walmart and Tyson on the stadium. So to me, it's like that was in my opinion, you can kind of help me on this. That was a selfish decision when you could have used that. I mean, now you're backtracking it and a backhanded compliment, putting Tyson on these patches. But you could have had Walmart and Tyson help your football program out, but you chose to put it on the stadium. Now you're running into this issue where you need $10-15 million in revenue. And then when, Sam Pittman was let go, he comes in with Ryan Silverfield and said, well, we didn't set Sam Pittman up for success in our football program's not in success of competing for a national championship in the SEC. So you see and you peel back the curtains of what's being said, and then he wants us to sympathize for him. It's hard for me to do that when you're raising ticket prices. You're asking people to join in on email to get into a spring game, or you're paying $10. I mean, there's just little things that right now he can't do nothing right until he starts doing things right. That's just where he's at in our eyes.
Well, Porter, I think you mentioned something that is important, in that being an athletic director at a big SEC school, a big public school, whether you like it or not, is in many ways a political gig. And I don't mean a political gig necessarily in like, I got to charm the Huckabees or I got to do something specifically in the State House. But I mean, managing those expectations and building, support within different constituencies, including regular fans, is very much part of it. And, to go back to that Walmart thing, right? If you have some major corporate donors at Walmart or Tyson's and they say, we don't want to be directly contributing very much to athlete payments because that's risky for us. We don't know which 20-year-old quarterback is going to get a DUI or get benched or be amazing, or say something very smart or very stupid. But if we put our name on a building, the building doesn't do any of those things, right? So we'll do that. That's a conversation that happens all over the country. But there's a way to communicate that so your message board buddies and your local sports writers and your influential YouTubers and your major fans can understand that distinction. And where I think so much of the frustration that I am perceiving, you would know better than me, but that I'm hearing from many Arkansas fans and writers, is the difference in that expectations clash, right? Or we think that the major corporations and major donors in this state are doing X, Y, or Z, and they're not, or that the school is asking for X, Y, or Z, and they're not. And there's a limit at how hard regular people can be pushed, unquestionably. I don't blame anybody for being mad if you think we're in 10th place here and 9th place there, and the bathrooms in this place suck, and this facility has this problem, and here's a guy that makes $1 million and a guy that makes $6.5 million asking me for another 50. Like, you can go to hell. And I get that completely. I went to Ohio State. I'm still an Ohio State fan. Like, beyond the fact that I'm a reporter right now, if Ohio State asked me for money, I would have an unchristian-like response. I think, right?
You were put in a position with your fan base that you had a coach that had 2 or 3 losses, and they're ready to kick him out of the door because
ready to send him to Siberia, right? And
game recognizes game on that. Yes, exactly. So I understand that part of it.
That's the level of intensity. So what I think one of the big challenges here, if I was working at a place like Arkansas, the thought I would be thinking, if I have to ask my fans for more, or whether it's more patience, more money, more something else, I have to be prepared to give them something in return. That might be lowering ticket price, that might be lowering parking, that might be going to the Atlanta Falcons concessions model or the Lafayette, Louisiana concessions model, where I'm going to ask you for more money, but a tall boy is $2, and you meet people halfway, or we're going to do this to make it easier for families to come. There's ways to finesse this a little bit. And then I think folks don't feel as bad about giving or being invested if they feel like they're being listened to, whether that's your governor, whether that's your pastor, or whether that's your athletic director. And when you don't feel that way, and if you feel like you're just throwing something into some gaping maw, boy, that's really frustrating. And I wouldn't blame any Arkansas fan for saying, I don't want to do that right now, especially if I don't trust the person that's allocating that money. And
You brought up a good point, because Arkansas moves in the direct opposite direction. Because I just now thought about this while you were talking. You're talking about concessions and going after the Atlantic Falcons model. Well, everybody was screaming, we want to raise the minimum wage. Guess what we've seen in Walmarts and McDonald's and all these kiosks? Well, something that's not being even talked about is now they do kiosks and you check out your own concessions at the Razorback stadiums now, but yet they jack the prices up and then tax you on top of that for a concession fee for as an extra tax they threw on the concession fee. So it's funny how you say, well, they could be doing this, but Arkansas is moving in the direct opposite direction, because you're saving money on staff to run your concessions, but you're raising the prices on everything and making us check out our own groceries per se.
Which goes to about making a poor experience. What I think, one thing I've learned from doing this beat for the last couple of years, right? I spend my professional life is centered around writing about business and policy and operations for athletic departments. You can get people to come to an Arkansas baseball game because the Razorbacks are really good at baseball. But then if the only thing they're getting out of it is winning, well, baseball's a funny game. You fail 2/3 out of the time and you're a great baseball player, and fans' interest can be fickle. You lose a series to Georgia and Alabama, and next thing you know, now there's 70% fewer people in the stands. They'll come all the time if they have a great experience, if it's fun, if they feel some sense of community. If you're doing this because it's my extension of being a resident of this state, it's my way of signifying that Missouri sucks or that Oklahoma sucks because I'm here. And you can do that, and you can sell it forever. Lord knows, South Carolina football has figured out how to do this for 45 years, and they've mostly sucked forever, right? And I think they're
you must have spotted my helmet in the background.
they're good at this. Yeah. And one of the great ways to make fans really angry is make their bathroom experience garbage, make it difficult for them to go get food, and to make it too expensive for them. Yeah. And I think that would be a great example of poor messaging. If you're going to cut down on labor costs and cut down on the interpersonal reaction, you can't also increase prices, or you can't also decrease variety or make that experience worse in some way. In some ways, I think the kiosk system's great.
Oh, it's absolutely great. You're in it after. Yeah, it is a good idea. It's just the purpose of you. Yet it's almost like you're paying to check out. I mean, I'm sure this is.
I get it.
We could go down a rabbit hole of that. It was just a thing that I went down the rabbit hole when you mentioned that. But I really want to switch kind of topics. We talked about this before we started recording. Tom Mars, lawyer here in Arkansas, put out a tweet, and it said, based on a review of the most recent publicly available data, the elimination of Arkansas's men's and women's tennis program created a Title IX financial aid disparity greater than 1%. And then he begs the question, did anybody review the Title IX data before the AD pulled the plug? So with me knowing no knowledge about that, one, what is this pertaining to? And two, can you give some insight on what this even means?
So there's a couple of different prongs right now. The athletic department can demonstrate compliance with Title IX. Generally speaking, you need to have equivalence in what you're spending on scholarships, not necessarily one-to-one with what you're spending on men and women, but it has to be in proportional to the school's enrollment. If you're, say, Emory-Riddle, right, an aviation studies university where most people are going to be pilots and the student body is 3/4 men, you don't have to have 50-50 spending on men's, women's sports. You do have to have enough women's sports offerings, but it has to be proportional. A lot of schools have more women enrollments than they do male enrollments residentially. So that the spending actually has to be a little bit tilted from there. You also have to you demonstrate that you are moving towards compliance rather than moving away from compliance, and that you're offering the kind of things that your student population is actually interested in, right? If the only women's sports that you offered were like equestrian, bass fishing, and chess, I'm making stuff up here, rather than volleyball or basketball, you might run into some issues. The dirty little secret, and I bet if we gave Mr. Mars here a couple cocktails and turned off the phone and asked him to respond, I think he would probably agree. The dirty little secret is most Division I schools are out of compliance with Title IX in one way or another. The way that Title IX enforcement happens is not that somebody from the Department of Education or the Department of Justice swoops in, does an audit, and sends you to Title IX jail. What generally happens is things are enforced when somebody sues. Somebody like, hypothetically, Mr. Tom Mars. I don't think he does a lot of as much Title IX litigation, but somebody like him would bring a suit, and that happens all the time when schools drop sports. And then sometimes they end up adding other ones, like we saw with Clemson and track, or like we saw with Iowa getting rid of swimming, but then adding women's wrestling. These, or with East Carolina dropping sports and then ending up reinstating them, because once you get to the lawsuit, you realize, oh my gosh, it's way cheaper for us to settle and make this one change than to go into compliance. But that process is so long and expensive and sporadic that, as depressing as this sounds, many universities will look at making a decision like this and think it is worth the risk that we get sued or dragged into litigation, because the odds of that actually happening and then us needing to make a change relatively low. It's a cynical bet, but a realistic one. I can't say without doing a lot more research whether Arkansas is now formally out of compliance or not. Like I don't want to insinuate that. I don't know.
This was posted on Twitter. I mean,
sure. But you know, Tom's also just not some random guy, right? Like he's one of the 3 or 4 biggest sports litigators. But this is an issue, and I would not be surprised if there were other attorneys who were calling up tennis parents right now. Again, kind of parents that might have money to help finance this sort of thing, saying, Let's file some FOIAs, right? I say this with deep love and appreciation. This is right. This is a fan base that knows how to file Open Records Act requests.
Yes,
and is willing to challenge the school's narrative on some of these things. And I wouldn't be shocked if that happens with this tennis decision on some level as well.
So, alluding to that, is this the Hail Mary? Is this something? And we're just speculating, or we're just best case scenario. Is this something that could end up possibly saving the tennis program and bringing it back? Is that a possibility if they want to sue for this? And they're like, hey, look, we didn't have any notice. You're in this, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And could that force their hand and be like, okay, well, we'll just bring it back?
That could happen. That could happen. It could be, okay, well, we're not able to bring it back, but we will commit to adding another sport, or adding 2 other sports, or adding X number of other women's sports opportunities beyond this. Fine. Sure. Again, we need to know a lot more about the specific facts of this situation here, but that outcome happens not irregularly when sports are dropped, particularly when sports are dropped that have fans and parents and money that are able to back it up. Things either get reinstated or moved around again. It could totally happen.
So I'll get you out of here on this. And this is, kind of bringing it back down to earth now. And a lot of people, when you ask the common fan, well, this is just a tennis program, or it's just this, it's just that. We here at the Hog Talk, and there's many others that are very passionate about saving all the sports. But speaking to those not casual fans, the ones that are just thinking this is just a tennis program, peel back the layers and really explain why this is important to really stand up and speak out about things like this. What could this possibly lead to? And how many other Division I programs can look at this and then now help them save their programs, not just tennis, but other tennis or other programs that could be in jeopardy?
I think the way I look at it is, I believe that it's important, if you love a public university, and especially one that's meant to be a flagship to represent and serve the whole state, I think it's important to care about how that institution is using resources, and whether they're aligned with the things that you think are important. And I would go back and say to anybody who's listening to this, I think that's true for the university as a whole, right? And it would be, I think, important that Arkansas remain affordable for Arkansans. I think that it would be important for this institution to not only offer a great liberal arts experience, but also to make sure that you're serving the agriculture industry in this state, the mining industry and the resource extraction industry in this state, the business community, right? You want it to be relevant to you. If it was relevant only to industries and people in suburban Maryland or Silicon Valley or New York or Salt Lake City, regardless, I would say, like, that's not what Arkansas needs. And I think it's okay for you to say, I want this to represent what's important to us. And that may or may not include tennis. If this is not a state where a lot of people play tennis or follow tennis or watch tennis, and then the community decides we want to spend this elsewhere, I don't think you need an apology for that. That doesn't make you bad people. The concern is, are we getting what we are asking for as we pay to support this with our tax dollars, with our ticket dollars, with our donation dollars, with our love and attention, even if we went elsewhere, but we care about the Hogs? That's an important question to ask. And if the institution and the regents and the leadership believe that you can cut corners and make this a less expansive department and not get pushback, what is tennis today could be something else tomorrow. Could be gymnastics, could be affordable seating at other stadiums, could be radio broadcast, could be any number of things. So I don't think it's alone a catastrophe, and I certainly don't think it's just like, oh my God, we got to blame the football players or the women's basketball players for this. This guy got greedy, and that's why we don't have this other thing. Like that, I don't think is fair or helpful. But I would say, even if you don't care about Arkansas tennis, but you just care about the Hogs, I think it's important to look at this and think, are they being good stewards of these resources? If I can't trust them about tennis, can I trust them about putting our football team and our baseball team in a position to be successful?
Yeah,
is that fair?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because that's what we hear. When I first started, I started the podcast and started covering Arkansas women's sports. So when you start covering the programs that not a lot of people are interested in, or it's the offbeat ones, you hear those things all the time. Well, it's just this, or it's just that. Well, Arkansas has 50 something national championships in track. Well, that's just
sure
here in the South. It's football, basketball, baseball, and then really nothing else matters. Or you could even, if you want to go baseball, cut that out, because have all the SEC championships in baseball. Like, well, you didn't do nothing in football. There's always.
I think it would be fair to say, and I would put much of rural Ohio, where I grew up, just simpatico culturally with Alabama, Texas, and Arkansas. It's football. It's football recruiting.
Yep.
Then maybe it's basketball. It's basketball a little bit more now than maybe it was a minute ago. I understand that's the most important thing.
Because how many people, and this is just asking you an Ohio State question, how many people really hang their hat on the basketball national championship and the great team y'all had? Like when other than if you were poking fun at Michigan, when people say, well, you only have this national championship in basketball, like, well, that's basketball. What have you done? What's the vibe there with that in Ohio?
In Ohio, the Ohio State national title was what, like 1960? Like this was when Jerry Lucas was on the team.
About the one with Oden, Greg Oden.
They didn't win, unfortunately. They made the championship game. Right. They lost to Florida. But Ohio State, I think, is an interesting example, because that's actually one of the largest athletic departments in the country in terms of sports sponsorship. They got like 30 sports. It's like the Ivy Leagues, the Service Academy, Stanford, and Ohio State. And there's a small segment of Ohio State's fan base that's like, I am so glad that we won a national title in rifle and synchronized swimming, and our women's hockey team will just get us the second best in the country. We win national titles sometimes. But there's more people that are like, I would flush all of these things down the toilet for a chance to beat Michigan in football. Or if I have to sacrifice men's gymnastics and those Olympians to get a 4-star left tackle, I'll do it. And I think you run into some problems if that's the mindset you use to run an athletic department. Like this, broadly speaking, that's more common in the SEC than it is in the Big Ten. You can run into some problems legally. You can run into some problems with Title IX compliance. But there's ways to do this where you can be successful in football, or in whatever single sport is most important to you, and not eliminate everything else.
Yeah, I say, me being a Clemson fan, there's plenty of times I would get the college football game, and they're like, well, this is the only way I'm going to ever see Clemson win a national championship, and I got to see two. So I know what I would give, because I was able to witness that. But anyways, Matt, I really want to appreciate your time. Let everybody know where they could find you. Your article was really awesome. I mean, it really shed a lot of light, and I really wanted to get on here and, talk to the fans and just kind of push this narrative of what can we do to really save the tennis program, or what can this mean for other programs. So I really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. If this is the sort of thing that's interesting to you, I run a publication that writes about money and policy and off the field stuff and sponsorships, and you can find it at extrapointsmb.com. It's read by athletic departments throughout the SEC and throughout the country, as well as researchers and lots of regular fans too. I won't be offended if you're like, no, I really just care about football and recruiting and who's going to win these games. Hey, listen, that sounds great. There's a lot of people out there that are doing that. I'm the guy that's trying to get the financial data about tickets for gymnastics or something. That's okay.
Awesome. Well, again, we really appreciate your time and for coming in. And fans, this has been the special episode of the Hog Talk podcast. Catch Adam and the guys Sunday, 8:05 for Hog HQ Live. We will be back on Monday at 6:05, and we'll catch you on Monday.